Welcome to the In Truth podcast, where the only agenda is the pursuit of truth. Welcome to episode Pain and Suffering of the In Truth podcast. I'm joined by a very exciting panel. You've got some familiar faces to my left. We've got Sammy, and we've got Michael, and we have a new guest on our panel today, Basim, who I have to say I'm very excited about his contribution today to our topic, pain and suffering. If you don't mind, Basim, giving us and telling us a little bit about yourself, since we've already heard from me, Michael, and Sammy.
Thank you, Abuna. Thank you for having me, and Sammy and Michael. First and foremost, thank God for giving us this forum to do this kind of thing. Secondly, a bit about myself. I am a lawyer.
Just didn't come out as funny as you intended, did it?
You guys were meant to laugh.
But make sure the microphone's right on you.
Yes.
For sound quality wise.
For sure. I am. Maybe we start with I'm a junior architect. I'm a recent graduate of a Master of Architecture course, and
hello.
And I hate defining myself by a profession, but I think the kind of work I do is very, I try to be very critical and sensitive to a subject or a brief that we're designing for, and I kind of, I don't know, it's kind of become a personality as well. This is the way I try to live my life. I try to be diligent and sensitive of people and place and
so why do you call yourself junior? When do you become an architect, and then when do you become a senior?
There is an extensive registration process, much like lots of other fellowships and professional registration pathways. But until then, I'm considered a junior or a graduate architect. But basically, the process. What were you asking about the process?
Just to know why.
Basically, you become a registered architect when you can demonstrate to a board of architects, or the Institute of Architects in Australia and Western Australia, that you're a fit and competent architect. That you like some of the things I said, that you can you're sensitive to things, and that you're aware of the technical and statutory regulations.
So are these through exams, or just you pass certain time or experience? Yes. After 5 years you become...
Well, yes. So there's they say they give a ballpark 2-3 years of professional work experience as, a postgraduate work experience. And then there is, exams, and then a panel interview where you kind of give they kind of test your character a little bit, but it doesn't, anyone can kind of, say the right things in that panel interview. It's very much I don't know, I think about your, the formality of your admission, to the Supreme
the driving
Court.
Indiscretions, yeah.
Sure. You get someone to, pass this admission for you, right?
So once you get, so a registered architect has to move your application?
Something like that. But you make this case to a panel of architects. Yeah.
And then what does that permit you to do when you are a registered architect?
That's a good question. I'm still figuring all this stuff out. But basically you can call... Say again?
Work independently?
Yes. So you can sign off on things. You have the power to sign off on certain things that only an architect can. And you can also call yourself an architect, which is comes with it.
Scrap the junior.
Huh?
Scrap the junior.
Yeah, exactly. I can't wait. Respect me. Yeah.
I am an architect.
No, it basically just means that you can put this title on a piece of paper and ask for more money, and you're a bit more revered in construction, and if you're working at a big firm or something like that, you can usually leverage that position for more of an opinion in design settings, or if there's certain design review panels or things like that, your opinion means more. It's very you become a figurehead in some of these.
So do you have to work for someone if you're a junior?
under the
Funny
supervision
funny
of someone.
story actually. You usually have to. You usually have to have.
I mean, you can't set up your own business and.
So you usually have to have 2 to 3 years of supervised experience under an architect. But my boss actually currently was kind of staunchly against the bureaucracy of registration, and he graduated from his master's course and he went out on his own, and he traveled a lot and did a lot of international work experience, in Europe and I think in Japan. And he came back and very quickly started his own, and he did have some like a substantial amount of local experience, but he very quickly and as an unregistered architect started his own practice, which is doable, but you can't call yourself an architect. You're called a building designer or an architectural designer, but you can't call yourself an architect. It's all just like semantics, but. He's just been registered as an architect. He's probably one of the most brilliant, architects that I know. And he without expletives, he put the he gave the middle finger to the bureaucracy and just said, "I'm going to do this thing on my own. I'm going to find a way to get credit,
Fight the power.
advanced standing, for his
I've
international work experience."
got 2 interesting questions for you. How long was that journey for him?
Well, he probably longer than most.
Because he decided to go against the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd probably say it took him 6-7 years as opposed to like the minimum ballpark that they give of 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
But a lot of people I trust in this industry say to me that they kind of agree with, his kind of perspective that bureaucracy is just that registration is just an overly bureaucratic thing. And you're much better off proving to yourself that you're a fit and competent designer rather than... Yeah, exactly. Rather than just virtue signaling to a panel or, studying hard for an exam or something like that.
It's actually very interesting because, I don't know, from medical background, I can't be a dentist unless I'm registered. So there is no way around. I can't open a shop and call it
You can't practice on any patients or anything.
I mean,
I think the key distinction here is that all we do is draw pretty pictures, that's all we do. So, you have someone's life, on the line. I think, it's probably needs like probably a standard of competence, I think.
Here's a question that I think mildly ties in with our topic of pain and suffering today. And I didn't ask you both this last time, but it would be interesting to hear your response anyway. You enjoy what you do?
Very much so, yeah.
You love it?
Yeah, I do.
Is it ever painful?
Yeah. I think...
Has the journey been painful thus far?
Yeah. I think the study of architecture is both an art and a science, Like, we have to be very scientific sometimes, but also very creative. So you're exercising a left and right brain, while you're studying architecture.
Sounds like a whole lot of balance is required.
Absolutely. And I think very similar to law, like, you have to be...
I think in everything in life.
And medicine, actually. Medicine's an art, but also there are certain objective truths, that you have to abide by in medicine. But like treating someone becomes an art, being able to recognize someone's
the whole
demeanor.
diagnostic procedure.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your answers to this question as well. Do you enjoy what you do? Do you enjoy your career?
If you got me on any other day, I would say yes. Just today, I'm struggling at work. But yeah, I enjoy it a lot. It was a long journey, but just looking back or looking where I am at the moment, I think it's definitely worth it. And sometimes I take it for granted that, I earn all right or my life is okay, but it is a blessing. I had days where I literally didn't have the money to pay the rent, and now it's okay. It's something I don't think about. So no, I'm in a very good position. I enjoy what I'm doing. It's not only, I mean, not about the money, but I really enjoy as well helping people. Regardless, it's very rewarding.
Yeah, and I think particularly with you, Sammy, as well, you're developing a whole lot of skills very quickly, because to be a periodontist / dentist and to run a business requires two completely different skill sets. As a dentist, I think it's safe to say, well, maybe it's not safe to say, but dentists that I've known that aren't business owners are very introverted in a sense. They go in, they clock out. Running a business is completely different. You were telling me last year that you were hosting a Christmas party for your staff, and after it was all sort of positive vibes, and you really enjoyed it, and so on and so forth. So it's amazing the journey that we go on and where it takes us, because we think we're going to be spending the rest of our lives doing this, but and we build up skill sets as such, and then something happens, life happens, where so many different skill sets are needed, and dare I say it, there's a struggle and a pain that comes with building up these skill sets. Sorry to expand on that. Marco, I'd love to hear from you. By the way, a little profession that I always make to Michael. I love lawyers. Christ hated law. Well, he condemned lawyers, but I think they're bad lawyers. But I absolutely love lawyers. Some of my favorite movies are lawyer movies. Some of my favorite TV shows are lawyer movies. There's no doubt that there's a bad side to the occupation, as of course there would be with many other occupations, and I think it's a whole lot of misunderstood. But I think I think it's a very godly profession. Tell me, do you love your work?
I do. I think the thing I love about it, and I think I do love it, is it presents a very specific intellectual challenge. A lot of the time, you're presented with very novel situations, and you're having to sort of simultaneously think about abstract concepts, and think about what is a principled way to apply this abstract principle to a novel scenario or a novel set of facts, which is in the work that I primarily do, which is dispute resolution. That is a big part of the work. But something I thought about while Sammy was...
bring the mic closer, please.
While Sammy was talking, sorry, Warner, was the fact that you get to help people. And I feel like, all cliches aside, and the passage in the Gospels that deal with this matter aside, if we can put it to aside for 1 second, I think I've been a bit let down by the profession since being in law school, working in a few law firms, having worked in the court itself, the court being the judicial court
body.
I think I've seen that there is a problem in this country in relation to a lack of access to justice, and that's probably a problem across the Western world.
Is that purely financial?
It's financial primarily, because the idea behind the law is that a judge is supposed to apply the law without fear or favour to every citizen. Every citizen, including the king, is subject to the law, the Magna Carta, right? But in truth...
What's Magna Carta?
It's just this idea that developed in England in the 10th or the 11th century, basically being that no person is above the law. Everyone is bound by the rule of law. And it's one of the great, fundamental tenets of our society, a democratic and free society. But I think a problem that we see practically in today's world is that unless you've got the big dollars, if you've been wrongfully accused of something, or if your business has been harmed by a harmful or an untrue allegation, unless you've got the big dollars, a lot of the time you can't actually vindicate your rights, which is a really sad thing. So I think part of, and the work that I do, which is commercial in nature, I see that more often than not. We have to make tough calls about who we act for, before we even get to a discussion of vindicating somebody's rights or enforcing somebody's rights. So I think something that will help me enjoy the profession a bit more is finding a way to maybe give back. Or perhaps I was having a chat to Baz, who's my dear older brother, FYI.
4 or 5 years old.
3 years, 4 months and 4 days older than me. I think something like teaching, or, you know, just a way that I can give back and, you know, this is getting pretty philosophical, and I know, and I'll stop talking in a second, but
Pro bono work.
pro bono work is one thing, that is a good way to do it. But I think conceptualizing the problem in my own mind as being this massive thing that has to be addressed is probably the wrong way to go about it. A mentor that I have in my life has told me that you shouldn't think about these global problems or these universal problems as something you can change. You shouldn't think about the world as something you have to change. If you can nudge it in the right direction, then you're doing something positive. And if everyone nudges the world in the right direction, we can sort of get on a better footing, right? So I think that's something I want to do, if I can, in a small way, you know, instill that. And yeah.
It's quite interesting that the topic of today is pain and suffering. And in some way or another, we can trace an architect's work, priest's work, dentist's work, lawyer's work to prevention of pain. You boil it down to its roots, somewhere along the line, you will see it's about either restoration of what was a painful state to a healthy state, or about avoiding pain altogether. Just something interesting to think about. So, pain and suffering. 17 minutes in, we finally get to it. So, look, there's a couple of things that I think we're all going to have to answer, regardless of what worldview you have, and I think we hope to answer within this podcast. Why is there suffering? There's one that's particularly prevalent these days, and I think all theists have to answer to this, which is, if you have a divine worldview, if you believe that there is a God out there, why is there, and particularly as well, suffering within good people? Why do good people suffer and bad people tend to be successful? Before we hit that, I've got an interesting story, and then I'll get your ideas on. I'll give you a bit of an advance on this. I want you all to define what pain and suffering is.
Forgive me, but I thought for a sec you're about to introduce a sponsor or something.
Not at all.
Before we get into it, just a word from our sponsor.
No sponsorships here.
Forgive me.
And no scripts here as well. So, interesting story, a true story, and it happened to someone incredibly close to me. This person has been through an intense life of pain. Physically, he's just always been sick. He's always been in pain. Always. And so he goes to the doctor this one time, this new doctor that he's got, he's got kidney disease, and he goes to this new urologist who's looking after him, who he's been very happy with. And he goes to the doctor and he says, "Doctor, I'm still, like, I'm despite the medication that you gave me, it's worked, but only a little bit, but I'm still in so much pain. I wake up with so much pain, random parts of my body hurt, so on and so forth." The doctor looks at him and smiles. And he says to him, "My friend, this means you're alive." So with that, I want us to have a little bit of a discussion on what is pain and suffering. What is it? I mean, this could only take maybe 5 seconds to define it, or it may be something completely different, but it's worth throwing the question out there and defining terms before we continue. If you'd like to go ahead, Basim.
I was interested to hear what you want to, would have to, how you define pain and suffering from like a theological point of view, but also, the beginnings of pain and suffering in the context of sin and the creation, how sin entered the world, and we say that, the introduction of pain and suffering into the world was as a result of the original sin, but I think my interest in this topic has more to do with, the day-to-day experience of pain and suffering rather than, like a high-level understanding of what it is and what it's defined as. So I'm interested to hear what you guys reckon. Yeah.
So
Sammy?
I'll get into that, but what do you mean by the day-to-day pain or suffering?
I think very much like the story Abuna brought up. Pain and suffering to me is the most substantial evidence that we are alive. Like that's part and parcel of what life is to me. That's how at least I perceive pain and suffering. The fact that we feel means that we are, we feel pain and suffering means that we've, by God's grace, been given a life, and been given a consciousness to navigate pain and suffering and succumb to it, sometimes. So I'm, as a, in a real solipsistic kind of way, which just means like, if
Solipsism is not welcome here, my friend.
I totally agree, but just from a very selfish point of view, pain and suffering.
Just say from a very personal point of view.
From a very personal point of view, pain and suffering, to me is or navigating pain and suffering is
Condition of life, I think, is what you're trying to say.
Exactly right. Yeah.
I think of pain as well. It has to be from a personal point of view as well. I don't think of it as something abstract. So as I was preparing for this, I thought, I asked myself and I don't know, you correct me if I'm going off track a bit, what does it mean, pain? Or is all pain bad? Because, I was just talking a few minutes ago.
We'll get to whether pain's bad or not, but right now we just want to define what is pain. For example, you could define it as something uncomfortable, the state of being uncomfortable, or other people would probably describe it as a little bit more severe than that, in a sense that it's the pain, or it's.
I just want to because the reason they seem to be very related to me is because if the weather is cold and then you put your hand in warm water, that's very pleasant. But if it's boiling water, that's burning, that's pain. And both of them would have some sort of discomfort. These are very superficial examples, but it just illustrates that, there are very different forms of pain. And I think personally the pain that I would describe as real pain to me is some form of, whether discomfort or more, that I can't see benefit from. So if someone is really sick and they are not having cancer or struggling beyond benefit or beyond any point of wellness or anything that can
very different.
That,
I think
can good. Anything that good that can come out of it. Then that is a true pain and suffering. Obviously, that's very subjective from one to one. What can hurt you doesn't necessarily will hurt me.
So that's quite interesting, Sammy. You've said pain is when there is a feeling of hurt or discomfort that has no means to an end. So, for example, a cancer sufferer who's deteriorating away painfully, no cure, they're terminal, and so on and so forth, as opposed to, for example, someone who's got let's just use my example. I've just had surgery. I'm going through a lot of pain on my wrist to fix the ulnar nerve. Very painful procedure, but over the long term, it's going to lead to a cure. So interestingly, I think given your definition, Sammy, this is not real pain in that sense. I wouldn't disagree with you, by the way.
No. Yes, I actually want to add to, or one thing and maybe another later, but one thing about pain is obviously you said, well, you're still alive if you have pain. It's a protection mechanism. So I like running, and now I can't run because it's painful every time I run. And the reason it is painful, or it is a way for me because of that pain, I know that there is something wrong with my leg. So I can't keep going on it. I have to do something different to get it right. So not all, and as frustrating as it is for me, it's not really the end of the world. It is, well...
You wouldn't classify yourself as being in pain as a result of not being able to run?
No. Although when I'm talking about while I'm running, I am in pain. That's true.
Yes.
But I think it would be very different if I am someone who earns their living from running marathons twice a year. Yes. If I am a top athlete, then
and you get a muscle injury,
that is a devastating event for me.
Yes, Michael.
I could be I could be going down a rabbit hole with this, but I don't feel like I have at the front of mind, despite actually looking into it a little bit before the episode, an academic definition of pain that I'm actually comfortable with, because I feel like pain is one of those things, to understand it needs to be felt, and that's the only way you're ever going to sort of come to grips with what pain is, like true pain, like the loss of a loved one, betrayal by a close friend. Like, I feel like those things, I don't feel like there's a way you can conceptualize it. Like, just when you guys were talking, I was trying to think. I was like, can I really?
It's difficult.
It's hard.
Yeah,
it's really
difficult.
hard.
I remember reading a medical definition for pain back in my undergrad days, and maybe it can be discussed as a metaphor potentially, but also quite literally. It defined pain as the subjective, and you were talking about subjectivity, the subjective perception of a noxious stimuli. Like you talk about hot and cold, right? But it can be anything. Like, I don't know, a loud sound, a bang, or metaphorically as well, like the loss of a loved one. Oh, sorry, the loss of a loved one, or all these things, like like emotional pain, physical pain, all these things.
Sorry. Yeah. I agree with Micah. I think actually from experience, I don't think I had any physical pain, or the most painful experience I had always was with losing someone, relationships, being disappointed or betrayed with people. That is the most, that's why I think it's different from one to one, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Look, if you have any nephews or nieces, and you try to describe a pain where there's a relationship that was so dear to you, and that relationship went wrong, they would struggle to understand why you're in pain, right? And so, it's difficult to define academically, like Michael said, from that point of view, because pain is a whole lot of different things for all sorts of different people. There's actually diseases out there where people actually convince themselves that they're in pain, right? I'm not sure if it's called Munchausen's or not, or I think Munchausen's is more people that pretend that they're in pain for some sort of benefit. There's a disease out there where the brain confuses pleasure for pain. Again, I'm not sure what it's called. Guys, a little bit of a funny asterisk on today's episode. I've actually printed the wrong notes. So I'm just going on some of the research. I'm sure there will be prequels to this episode, so I'm just going off the notes there. But
so I've had all these Warner's getting fired.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know what's funny is every one of us held these notes and
And we were
didn't
just
pick
like,
up on
what's he on about?
No,
It's the wrong
great,
notes. Wrong notes. Wrong notes.
Oh, yeah,
good
great.
stuff.
I actually haven't checked them. Even.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing.
That's
we
where we
can-
went wrong.
they're-
Sammy should have read
They're
something.
basically redundant. But I had a list of all
Hello.
of these things on my notes, and I've actually forgotten their names. Pain is a whole lot of different things for different people. I think we can accurately, if we were to come up with an academic definition, it's an undesirable hurt in someone's life. And suffering is the state of being in that pain. Usually suffering is associated with a prolonged period of time. There's some people that would say, I've suffered to go through medical school. I've been through a very hard road to get through medical school. And other people wouldn't see it as a painful experience. They would see it as skill building and academic building to a certain end goal where you come out the better as a result of it, but not just you, other people around you. I think for the sake of this podcast and for the sake of this conversation, we're not going to be talking about that specific pain, right? We're not going to be talking about the kind of pain where someone voluntarily goes through it as a means to an end to get somewhere. Whether that be athletes training and going through a whole lot of pain for it to get to a particular standard, or whether that be a professional honing in on his skills over painful years. And we're also not going to be talking about pain that's consequential. For example, a drug addict's life, I'll call this the negative feedback cycle of death. A drug addict first starts by taking, let's say, analgesics for the entertainment of it, for the high of it. And so they eventually get to a place where to maintain that high, they need to take more of that drug. And the more they take it, the more drug that they need. And so their base level becomes so low that they become in a state of depression, a state of pain, albeit just psychologically. But it is actually as a result of their own doing in that sense. Of course, a lot of people out there would argue that people take drugs because of, because they were forced to, or because the streets and the life that they had and the nurture that they had and the environment that they were exposed to led them to that. Again, I think for the sake of this podcast, we're not going to be talking about that. I think for the sake of this podcast, we're going to talk about real pain and suffering. Things like relationships gone wrong. Things like death in someone's life. Things like disease in someone's life.
Can I just disagree? Not actually that we are not talking about it, but that these people who are drug addicts who have been on the streets they are as well in a lot of suffering and pain. They are and I think they are taking these drugs because it is, or they see it as their only hope or help or the time that they can just relax or de-stress.
I think that was a very bad example to use.
Sorry, I didn't mean.
No. I actually agree with you. That was a very bad example to use. The point that I was trying to drive across is we're not going to be talking about consequential pain. So, just a very simple example. I tell a little boy not to cross the road unsupervised. They decide to go against that advice. They go and they're hit by the car and they're in a lot of pain in hospital. Of course, children have a level of ignorance where they need supervision, but at a very superficial level, that's the. I'm not talking about consequential pain, which is pain that you inflict on yourself with full knowledge, and for whatever either foolish reason, maybe sometimes even intelligible reasons. I think in very rare circumstances, they're intelligible reasons where someone voluntarily does that to themselves.
That is
like smoking.
Diseases.
Smoking is one of these things. So you can be a smoker and then you get lung cancer and you're suffering.
Right, but that can go back to the drug addict case.
Correct, as well.
But I think that's a recognized school of thought in even Christian apologetics, right?
Yes.
Like people that say, "Oh, if God is so great, why has He created a world where there are problems or where people suffer?" Right? So there's obviously the stuff we're going to talk about later, I assume. Not basing it off the outline, but
don't worry about this. I've printed
I do have the correct one though.
yeah,
Or
of
my
Sammy's
correct one.
outline. No, but that stuff, that's self-inflicted, right? So, and this idea in apologetics is that God has made a world with a design, with a purpose, and that has natural laws. Now, you can test those natural laws as much as you want, as much as the next guy, but at the end of the day, there are rules and laws that govern what will happen to you. So if you smoke too much, for instance, you're exposing your body to carcinogens. You know what I mean? It's like it's also an answer in like apologetic thought to people that make that argument against God.
I can I also just disagree for a second. I think
yes.
Talking about consequential pain, I think is important because I think in some of my reading, at least, and I think like I'd love to discuss it with you guys, is God makes certain prescriptions about pain and suffering to us, and I think I think it's a topic for another time. But I think the inverse of these prescriptions are hedonistic and pleasure and things like that. But I think these prescriptions are important because if we don't consider them, then that's when we fall into the trap of, that's when we inflict this consequential pain that we're talking about. So I think as we go on, I'd love to bring up some of these examples, but if they're relevant, if and when they're relevant.
Yeah. Well, you're talking here as a Christian, if I am not a Christian, but that will take us to it. Well, I'll stop there, but if I'm not a Christian, then these prescriptions don't apply to me. So, or maybe you can call them the natural law then.
Yeah. Well,
something, or the moral law.
I think they align with like going against some natural laws as well, like Michael was talking about. So I think, maybe when relevant, maybe we can touch on some of them. Yeah.
I think from an atheistic point of view, there really is no basis to understand pain other than, look, it just exists, just like we do. We just exist. Pain just exists. Your aim in life should be do everything that you can so that you're in the least amount of pain possible at all times. I think would I be wrong in saying that would be the fundamental atheistic worldview?
I think you're right, especially about physical pain.
Yeah.
And I think further to your point, and again, this is not coming from any area of knowledge per se. This is coming from an inference that I'm making listening to you guys speak. It would be extremely difficult for an atheist to explain what true pain is all about or why they experience such significant or intense feelings of pain when, like we said, some of those, a relationship breakdown or a betrayal or, the loss of a loved one. Like, I feel like that pain is not explicable by what you're saying.
Look, atheism will fail to explain that because atheism reduces everything to, Richard Dawkins said it, there is no pain, there is no good, there is no evil, there is just blind and pitiless indifference. There is no justification for any of it. You feel it, and it just so happens that you feel it. You're here, make best of what you've got right now, do everything in your power to make sure that you don't feel it. And if you're in a position to do that, if you're blessed with intelligence, if the atoms have come together in a way where you've got superior intellect, then you should use that as a mechanism of survival of the fittest. You should be graduating to the highest paying job so that all pain can be avoided at all times. There is really no justification to help anyone out of their pain from an atheistic point of view, unless you're going to rely on your emotion. But again, your emotions are meaningless, right? It becomes a survival of the fittest. You're reduced to a beastly way of living.
It's a depressing
right?
line of thought.
Yeah. There's no ultimates. There's no absolutes. There's no right or wrong. There is no pain or no pain. It's all just a figment of your imagination. You're going to go 6 feet under one day. Look, from that point of view, I would say there has to be more than that. If you're an atheist, I encourage you, explore other worldviews for your own benefit. There has to be more than that. You have to be of some sort of inherent value, dignity, worth. How you feel should matter. If someone steals or robs from you, that should matter. If someone's done wrong against you, there's professions out there, dedicated professions, by the way. Lawyers go to school for a very long time to try and fix stuff like that. It matters, right? It matters. But let's step into the other shoes. Let's step into a theistic worldview. And because we're all Christians here, we're going to start with that. Lucky Christians. We have a basis for what pain is, right? We have a basis for who we are. We're humans made in the image of God. And the basis for sin is this fall that happened, right? We have this creation of Adam and Eve. They fall, they eat from the fruit. They choose to distrust God in favor of trusting another false God. A God of truth gives them a commandment of truth, and a God of lies comes and gives them a commandment of a lie. You shall be like gods. Don't listen to God when he says don't eat of this fruit. And then listen to this curse that the woman gets and the man gets as a result of this fall that they go through. This is Genesis 3:16. He says, to the woman, he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. There we go. Pain. In pain, you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. That's Eve's curse. Adam, look at what he says to Adam. Then he said to Adam, because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. That's the condition of suffering, like I said, right? Suffering is this condition of being in pain for a prolonged period of time. He's saying here, you'll be in pain all the days of your life. And not just that, both, look at how it continues. It says, both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, to return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. There we have the thesis statement, if you like, on why there is pain for Christian theists, right? The reason why there's pain is there was this adoption of a false god, right? This false god wants nothing but death and pain, right? And we've abandoned this god for that god, thereby bringing forth this idea of not just pain, but this idea of death. That's significant. That's very significant, right? Because pre-fall, you have this euphoric landscape. You have complete lordship of Adam. No lions would attack him. No diseases would strike him. No tornadoes will ruin his house. No cancers would ever afflict him. His wife would never punch him. You know, his wife would never go against him. I don't know why I chucked that in there, but it is pretty funny.
Is that your personal experience?
Okay.
Blink twice if you're not okay, Abun.
The reason why I said that is I actually looked up certain stats, and one of the stats that you'll find very interesting. You are more likely, 3 times more likely, to have someone closest to you, a family member or a best friend, cause significant pain in your life than anyone or anything else in your life. Isn't that crazy? Just think about that for a second. You are 3 times more likely that someone very close to you in your life will cause you the most significant pain in your life than anyone or anything else in your life.
Yeah, wow.
I believe it.
And yeah, it's this idea when you take up a wife, you are effectively in that vulnerable position.
The CCTV footage at Macca's and Big Park will attest to that one passing.
What happened? Well, you both had a fight at Macca's or something?
Never.
Look, I was just as a
Be careful, there's a witness at the back of the studio that's going to hold you accountable.
I know, but he's got his own biases, doesn't he? That one. As an older brother and as like a seeing my brother act in a very undisciplined manner, I had to represent my parents. I had to become a caregiver in a certain moment.
You bashed your brother.
Something to that effect, but I wouldn't use those words.
This guy's cracking. He's not. So look, given everything that I've just said,
I ran him over.
I actually,
did you really? No. Far out. I was
Thank you,
gonna
Mayor
say.
Garris, for your blessed hands.
So back on track. Given that, because this is pretty astonishing from a Christian point of view for all Christians that believe this, right? This is pretty astonishing, right? And you know, there's a basis for it, and I'm curious, what do you all think about that?
I actually think, as soon as you said that, I actually haven't heard of that stat before, but it makes absolute sense because, well, if you won't be hurt by someone who doesn't really care about you, you will be hurt if you lose someone who's close to you. So I'm just quoting here C.S. Lewis, whom I will quote actually. If I get the chance, I'll quote a lot. But he's saying here, to love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglement. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable. That's actually...
And here's the crazy thing. To not love is to effectively become a monster, right? To not love is to effectively it'll be cold, it'll be dark.
You would be dead, basically.
yeah,
That's what
yeah,
he's saying. You
yeah.
just...
That's
And-
unbelievable passage.
Yeah.
And I think that this will tie to then why if there is a God that we love or that says that he loves us and we as Christians believe that he is also almighty or omnipotent, why then, if he loves us and he has all the power to make us happy, why we're not happy?
Yeah.
Or why we are suffering? Or
I think eschatologically and soteriologically, I think we need to answer that question. It'd be lovely to hear all your thoughts on
can you
where we
explain
stand.
what is catalog?
We're all thinking eschatologically means like the theory of knowledge, or how you know what you know. Soteriologically means saved. This idea of being saved, right?
Yes,
Comes
okay.
from the Coptic word soter. Soteriologically means being saved. What?
Just like, I'm just remembering when you brought that up at discipleship, and I was just in awe of you. What?
So, you know, I'd love to hear. You've all come prepared. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'll give you my thoughts.
I really like, the going back to the prescriptions, God's prescriptions for dealing with pain and suffering, or even, introducing pain and suffering to us. God kind of signposts that life will be about pain and suffering because of sin, right? That example of Adam and Eve that you brought up. There's two things for me there. One, there is that prescription, that man must break sweat and plow the field, and will hurt himself, from the thorns and from harvesting, whatever. And a woman would also labor greatly, to give birth. But I was telling the boys before, I take it as a metaphor, that like, it's painful to harvest, but we do harvest, we grow because of it. And a woman as well, a woman labors greatly, but what comes at the end? Life, So I take that one as like a metaphorical prescription from above that, labor and pain and suffering is a part of the world, but, we're better off because of it. And if I might also, there's another prescription that Jesus makes to. So when Saul was stopped on the road to Damascus,
Wow.
Epiphanized.
yeah,
And he was blind.
yes, and God appeared to Ananias in a vision and said to him,
Saul's coming.
Saul is coming.
Yes.
God, the very first thing that Jesus says to Ananias, or like the second thing, I want to get it exactly, but he says to him, and Ananias was like scared, right, of Saul at the time.
He had a rough reputation. Yeah.
The Lord says to him, go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel, right? And the second thing Jesus says to him is, for I will show him how many things he must suffer for my name's sake, right? So that prescription for me means that being a Christian is pain and suffering, you know, like being of the world, right? In the story of Genesis, being in the world is pain and suffering, but there's an extended pain and suffering that comes with being a Christian. You know, it's not easy to be a Christian. Yeah. We'll suffer lots of persecution. And we'll be reviled and persecuted, just as Jesus was. And
well, I think in that line, Jesus himself said in John 16:33 that in the world you will have tribulation. So that's kind of his promise.
It's a condition of life. A condition of life is pain. I've got two things to say about it, but after you.
I love what Bassem just said, because I think Christianity, if that's at the end of the day what we're here to talk about, or what we're here to proclaim, the good news, we have to be upfront with ourselves that it is a calling, and it's a life of servitude and a life of submission to an ultimate example that's set before us, right? Yeah. And I just think about what St. James says in his epistle. He says, not just accept it, right? And it's a bit like what the Stoics talk about, which we'll get to in a sec. He says, count it in all joy. Count it in all joy when you face these trials and tribulations, because it's the testing of your faith, right? That gives us perseverance. And I think that's sort of the idea the Stoics sort of speak about, right? Like they don't just say, endure it. They don't say, accept it.
They say avoid it. They say do everything in your power to not everything that's convention, or certainly everything that the world teaches outside of Christianity is avoided at all costs.
Exactly,
right? Avoided at all costs.
But it's interesting how those parallels are drawn though between Stoicism and Christianity. And I just want to read you this quote by this German philosopher. His name's Friedrich Nietzsche. And he says very powerfully about this idea of Stoicism, or amor fati, which means love of fate in Latin. He says that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backwards, not in all eternity, not merely bear what is necessary, still less conceal it, but love it. Like I know that I think Baz later is going to get into the distinction between the ideas of the Stoics and our Christian faith, but to embrace it and to love it, I think that's the essence of what Christ actually calls us to do. Like he calls us, this is a way of life, like suffering and pain and, all these things, the gold has to go through the fire before it comes out on the other side.
Yeah. Look, I've got a couple of things to say about this, and then I think you want to add your part in. Sammy as well, if you want to have your say. Think of your greatest role model ever. Guarantee you they've gone through significant pain in their life, especially for what you hold them heroes for. One of the great desert fathers says this, which I find quite astonishing. He says the life of a Christian is them being crushed to their knees every day by sin, and through Christ getting back up. Every day. And so what the Christian does is every day is a replay of that. Every day is this battle. In martial arts, it's very much similar. It's this idea that life will hit and will crush you to your knees. But you have to get back up. And of course, Christianity injects the part with Christ there. One other thing for you to think about. We've talked about Adam and Eve and their fall. Look at this. One other, for me, most astounding, most significant shall we call it, cause of pain, or the reason why there's pain there, or understanding pain. And I'll use a very significant word in just a moment. I'm just trying to avoid it for now. this idea that Christ came into this earth, this idea that there's a curse given to Adam and Eve, and there's this seed that is promised with the curse of the serpent, right? There will come a seed that will crush your head, but you will bruise his heel, right? And so this seed comes, it's this Messiah, it's this Jesus Christ promised all the way in Genesis. And when he comes, he lives, shall we say, a reasonably ordinary life. Of course, I say ordinary very loosely, because from the moment he is born, he is oppressed. Herod commits to the infanticide of the country so that this baby does not live. The mum, the dad, and the baby are forced to flee into Egypt, to flee murder, right? This is oppression like you've never seen ever in your life, right? There is an infanticide here of epic proportions. We think Hitler is bad. I think this is a whole level worse. He goes on to grow. He goes on through, living to 30 years, and from 30 years to 33 years, a whole lot of drama comes down. But what the desert fathers say is that God endured every pain there is that the world has to offer. He suffered the pain of loneliness, right? It is actually said that his mental pain is the significant pain that he carried, right? The epitome of which, the epitome of pain that Christ suffered, contrary to popular thought, is not actually him on the cross, right? That's the epitome of, or the epitome of physical pain, but the epitome of pain, all-encompassing, that Christ suffered is actually in the Garden of Gethsemane. He starts sweating blood.
Yeah.
Right? He starts sweating blood, a condition called hematidriosis, hardly ever documented ever. It's this state of mental agony that he suffers that is so afflictive, that is so oppressive, the blood capillaries in his cheeks start bursting and he sweats blood. And he begs the Father, if this is your will, take this cup away from me. At that moment, he is lonely. At that moment, the multitudes and multitudes and multitudes of people that followed him were healed by him, were taught by him, were affected by him. Instant alienation. He's alone. His disciples are asleep. He is alone. And it's dark and it's lonely. And there's this path of doom and death awaiting, no savior, no nothing. And here's the crazy thing. The word that I was meaning to use before that I haven't used until now is that Christ, by coming and suffering through all this pain, sanctifies pain. Sanctifies, makes it a sanctity, makes it something blessed, right? And then it's just no wonder that he says something along the lines of, if your enemy slaps you, you turn the other cheek and you give them the other cheek for them to slap. That's an astonishing ideal to live by. Truly, truly astonishing. That goes against anything that anyone has ever said before, anything that anyone has ever taught before, right? This idea of rejection of oneself by virtue of sacrifice for everyone else around you. This idea of loving neighbor as oneself. This idea that I love you as my neighbor, as I love myself. That means whenever I look after myself, however I perceive myself, whatever good things I do to myself, I should look to do unto you. That's an astonishing ideal to live by. And Christ comes and sanctifies all of this, but not just that, he lives it himself. Right? He carries all of that and he carries it into the cross. And the reason why it's so significant is because it doesn't overpower him. He's not crushed by it. Right? He's taken the full sting of it, everything it has to offer, everything that life and pain and suffering can someone be possibly thrown at and with and tormented with, it is thrown at him all the way to his crushing death, right? And yet he lives. Yet he rises from the dead. Right? What a message of hope. What a message of hope for Christians. Right? What a message, what an ideal to live by. Your thoughts on that? One more last thing I'm going to cover before we finish, but what are your thoughts on that?
You got me choking up about it. Very, very beautifully said. I want to use that as like a key distinction with what Michael was saying. Speaking about, some of the other schools of philosophy around pain and suffering, like the Stoics, they talk about leaning into pain and suffering in a very secular way, or trusting yourself, the Buddhists as well, they preface.
Sorry, can you explain what does that mean?
Stoicism?
In secular way, or just
so
deference to oneself as opposed to a deity, like instead
a deference
of
to God.
yeah.
So do you know Stoicism, like the school of So I'm just from like a comparative theology, like this is the preface I'm making. They all talk about life being about suffering, right? The Buddhists also teach this reliance on self and the universe and whatever. But the key distinction here, like Abuna was saying, is we have our Lord, we have Jesus, who is the purpose and instructs us that love is the purpose, of this suffering, of this pain and suffering, it goes against natural law, I don't know, the Stoics lean into the natural law as well. They say, everything is fate, and the world will throw what it will at you, and you will have ailments, but you navigate these things by yourself, you're like Michael defined, you defer to yourself rather than to God, and St. Paul's got an interesting thing he says to.
Well, what is it in relation to the Stoicism?
Yeah, he says it to the Epicureans and the Stoics, but I just want to say again, I really love what you said, Abuna, about God sanctifying this pain, making it for something greater than just part and parcel of this world,
Abuna, you reminded me of maybe the best sermon I've ever heard. I'm not going to say whose sermon it is because I think it might embarrass that person, but it's
not me.
it's all about, it's a sermon given on Friday Eve of Passion Week. And it's all about St. Peter and this discussion about, first of all, the loneliness that Christ suffered in the garden, right? Like I like Baz, when you were talking about it, it just touched me significantly because I think in that garden, he's suffered and he felt every betrayal and every aspect of loneliness, probably in combination that anybody could suffer in human history.
It's all the world has to offer.
His closest friends, he said to them, "I'm having the worst night of my life. Can you stay with me? Can you wait with me? Can you watch?" And they go to sleep. And related to that point, and this sermon really focuses in on that, is the character of St. Peter in that story. And also, like in relation to what we're talking about today, the pain that St. Peter had to go through that night. Because his friend, who he had a conversation with probably merely hours before, where Christ is telling, when he's telling his friend Christ, he's saying, "I'll follow you to the ends of the earth. I'll take a bullet for you." And Christ looks at him and he says, "You're trying to do this yourself. You don't know what you're going to do, and I'm telling you, you're going to betray me." And he has the nerve to disagree with his Lord, right? And only one of them can be right. And we all know what happened. But I think the takeaway from that is that he failed to be self-critical. And once he realized what he had done wrong and he started to be self-critical, which is something the Stoics talk about a lot. They talk about this idea of introspection. Once he was introspective, what happened to him? He saw Jesus looking at him. And once he saw Jesus looking at him, he turned and he eventually... I can't imagine what he would have went through, knowing that his friend had been crucified, and maybe at the time the disciples lost faith, or they sort of overlooked the fact that Jesus said he was going to rise from the dead again. But St. Augustine says this really beautiful thing, and again, I got this from this sermon, so all credit to this person. He talks about St. Peter. He says, "Remembrance of his denial was necessarily bitter, so the grace of redemption
might even be more sweet. If Christ had not left him to himself, he would have not denied. If Christ had not looked at him, he would have not wept. And he goes on to say, like a doctor, he lances his swollen tumour in those whom he loves. By lancing, of course, he inflicts pain, but also ensures health later when he rises again. The Lord entrusts his sheep to Peter, to the one who denied him. So it's a story of pain, it's a story of betrayal, and it's a story of regret and repentance and probably unimaginable pain that St. Peter went through. He wept bitterly. That's what the gospel says. But then following that, he tends the flock and he's the rock that Christ has built his church on. So this idea of pain in that emotional sense is a process of refinement. It's a process of victory over, something that we go through. I wanted to share that.
It's astonishing. And I think it's an incredible parallel to Judas. And I think that's the key difference. It's that Peter looked onto Christ and looked for Christ as redemption. Couple of things that I want to mention as we wrap up. Genesis 50. We all know the story of Joseph. Joseph's sold into slavery. Joseph's betrayed by his brothers, an unspeakable betrayal, an unthinkable betrayal. I always turn back to the story of Cain and Abel, where Cain murders his brother Abel and then is asked by the Lord, "Where is your brother?" And he says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And the answer is yes, you are your brother's keeper, even at cost of your own life. You are meant to be your brother's keeper. Any older brothers that are out there, any brothers altogether, you ought to protect your brother. That's the right thing to do. These 10 brothers, they violate that. They betray their youngest brother, and instead of protecting him, they put him in a pit and they sell him into slavery and then put blood on his coat of many colors to deceive their father. Unspeakable act of betrayal, unspeakable. And we get this moment where Jacob dies. Obviously, the reunion happens and Jacob dies, and the brothers are shook. The brothers think that Joseph's being kind to them for their father's sake, because one thing they share in common is the fact that they're half brothers through sharing the same father, through sharing Jacob. And so the brothers come to Joseph and they kneel down before him, which, by the way, is a fulfillment of Joseph's dream to begin with, and one of the primary reasons why he was sold into slavery. They do bow before him before, but they don't do it realizing that he's the younger brother Joseph. They do it before Pharaoh. This time in Genesis 50, they bow before him, knowing that he's the younger brother, which is a fulfillment of his dream, where everyone will bow down to him. And so they come bowing down and they say, "Please forgive our trespass. For the sake of our father, please forgive the trespass of your brothers." Joseph weeps, and then he says to them, "Do not weep, for am I in the place of good?" Genesis 15. Am I in the place of God? Is what he says, not the place of good, sorry. Am I in the place of God? Right, he never puts himself in a place where he even judges, even though he was the primary victim of their offense. He says, it's not my place to judge, it's only God's place to judge. But what he says next is truly astonishing. He says to them, "You meant it for good, but God meant it for evil. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as is this day to save many people alive."
The other way around.
Yeah.
You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, is what I meant to say, sorry. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as is this day to save many people alive. That's astonishing. That's astonishing. The fact that Joseph can put 20 years of betrayal from his brothers, enslaved, imprisoned, he can put that behind him for the sake of his brothers and say, God intended all of this. And he intended all of this not just for the mere ends of pain and that's it. He intended all of this for the salvation of the world. By the way, that's exactly Christ's story. There is a means and an ends to this pain. The pain is for the salvation of the world. The cross is for the salvation of the world. Although people meant it for evil. Romans meant it for evil. Pharisees meant it for evil. The false witnesses and all the people that were out against him at this corrupt trial all meant it for evil. But God meant it for good in order to save about as this world. As we conclude, I want to go through one more example. And anyone out there watching this, I think it's incredibly important that you are well grounded in this. If you don't have a solid basis for why you suffer, life has this way of crippling you to your knees. And I dare say there is nothing good at the end of it if you're not well grounded. There is nothing but depression, possibly psychological diseases. I'd hate to see anyone go through any of that. I'm a priest. It's in my nature to hate that. There's help for you out there. I encourage you to find whatever help is there for you. But I believe this is the ultimate help. I believe there is nothing that can help you like this, and it's this. And we're going to do a very tiny case study on what I believe the most afflicted man in the history of the world outside of Christ is. And the only reason why Christ is more afflicted is because Christ is completely innocent. No one has ever existed that is completely innocent. Everyone else has to carry this curse that Adam carried. Christ is born into this curse despite being absolutely innocent from conception to him on the cross. Outside of that, there is only one person who has suffered a suffering that is anywhere comparable to Christ. And it's this man called Job. Job chapter 1, we're introduced to this man. Look at what the Bible says. He's blameless and upright, one who feared God and shunned evil. He has 7 sons and 3 daughters. He has 7,000 sheep. He has 500 yoke of oxen. He has 500 female donkeys. He has a very large household. And he is the greatest of all the people of the East. This is a man of good standing. And this is a man of good standing, not just by virtue of his riches, right? He would go to offer sacrifices, arise early in the morning and offer burnt offering, verse 5, chapter 1, verse 5. Early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did regularly. This man was beyond reproach, absolutely beyond any fault. And then you got this scene, you're taken somewhere else, and you've got this scene in the story of Job where the devil supposedly is walking to and fro, which is, by the way, a euphemism to say I've conquered the earth. There is nothing beyond my passing. I walk to and fro as a prince of the air, right? As St. Paul says, a statement of authority and a statement of dominion, a statement of victory. And then God does this peculiar thing, right? He says, have you considered my servant Job? Right? There is none like him. Right? God himself declares it. He says, have you considered him? There is none like him. Beyond reproach, a righteous man, one who fears God and shuns evil. And then the devil proposes this idea of what we call the prosperity gospel. He's only good because you've been good to him. You've blessed him. You've given everything that's right to him. You've done all that's good for him. You have done all of this. You take all that away, he becomes an evil man. He's only a product of your blessing, right? By the way, there's people that teach this. There's people that teach that if you're prosperous in life, everything you've done is right. Your relationship with God is good. Right? And if you're bad, it means you've sinned somewhere. This is wisdom literature, and this is a wisdom story trying to address this very question, right? And it's the root of the question is this: why does God allow suffering? But even further, why does God allow good people to suffer? Here's a question for you, very quick, and we have to be very quick. Why does God bring up Job in this situation? Why is Job a victim here? Why is he brought to the center stage? He's good. Why shouldn't he just go unnamed, go unheard of? Why bring him as a case in front of the devil? Why subject him to what is about to come to him? Not sure if any of us have an answer, but I want about 10 seconds for whatever answer anyone has.
I think that there's an example to be made. Hello. Very, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I think there's an example to be made of how one can suffer such hardship, how one can suffer much and stay faithful, I think.
Okay.
And how, we can't, separate these things sometimes. Just
Right.
going back to, the some of the things we were saying earlier.
Any other thoughts? If you don't, it's fine.
I think that idea again of the chastisement, if we're taking that theistic approach, which I think we are because we're looking at the story of Job, the idea that God chastises the one that he loves, like I've always found it hard to reconcile in this particular story because
lucky day today. You get to reconcile it. Let me go on with the story. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, so Satan, of course, puts this argument forward. Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. So, Satan here has this dialogue where he presents victory in front of Christ, or in front of God, I should say. God tells him, well, no, you haven't actually been victorious. There's this servant Job. He's beyond reproach. He's this, is that. Then Satan puts an argument of prosperity gospel. You've only blessed him. So, of course, he's going to love you because that's the result of you blessing him. And then the Lord says to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay your hand on his person. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Listen to this next part. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were ploughing and the donkeys feeding beside them, when the Sabaeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burnt up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels and took them away, yes, and killed the servant with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, fell to the ground and worshipped. That's astonishing. In an instant, he loses everything. Everything that is material, he loses. Everything that is material, he loses. And then we get this dialogue again between God and Satan. And, Satan goes through the same sort of argument where he says, you've blessed him with health. And then Job loses his health. Right? And so he's covered from head to toe. He's covered from head to toe I'll read it to you actually. So Satan answered the Lord, skin for skin, yes, all that a man has he will give for his life, but stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took for himself a potsherd with which to scrape himself, while he sat in the midst of the ashes. Then his wife said to him, listen to this, everyone. His wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. This is astonishing. This is a man who is afflicted in ways that we've never even seen before. A circumstance we've never even seen before. A man who in a day loses absolutely everything. He's yet to lose one more thing, and he will lose it. His mental state. This man has been he's been afflicted as far as any of his possessions go, as far as his children go, as far as his health goes. And in the next chapter, he actually loses his mental health. Look at what it says. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job spoke and said, may the day perish on which I was born, and the night in which it was said, a male child is conceived. May that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor the light shine upon it. May darkness and the shadow of death claim it. May clouds settle on it. May the blackness of the day terrify it. This is a man who is afflicted in ways that we could never possibly imagine. Ever, 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 ever. He has lost everything that he has. He has lost his wife. You'd think his wife is the one thing that will stand beside him. She tells him, curse God and die. How can you hold fast your integrity? You need to curse God and you need to die this instant. He worships when he is tormented. He worships when he is afflicted with all these afflictions. And then he loses his mental health. He starts cursing the day he's born. Who even does that? Your thoughts very quickly on this.
Is God calling the devil's bluff? Is that the purpose of it?
I don't think so. I don't think it's as simple as that. I don't think the world, God has really anything to prove to the devil. I think it's a battle that's mute from day dot. I don't think that God has ever settled to really win against the devil. He sought to save mankind from the devil. But the devil always knows. The devil knows.
It is moot. I think maybe more so what I'm trying to say is he calling that bluff so for the benefit of us?
I think you've got something there. I don't think that's the be-all and end-all. I think it's going to boil down to it very soon. Sammy, Basim, thoughts? What a story, huh?
I don't think God will be tempting Job because he doesn't tempt, as written in James. I think it's James somewhere that he doesn't.
Yes. Let no one say that you have been tempted by
Tempted
God
by
for God is not evil.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he may have allowed the devil or Satan to do it. But I'm thinking from Job's perspective going through that. I think he had no answers to anything. He was just being slapped time after another.
He's being crushed.
Yeah, without having, and that's what many people are going through at the moment. And that is the most painful, where you go through something and you don't know why me.
Yes.
Why me?
Yes. So there's this long dialogue that then takes place in the story of Job. 3 friends come and they all present different reasonings. They present what we call legalism and moralism. It's this idea that, again, it's almost like the prosperity gospel, which is there must be some sort of sin in your life for all of this to happen to you. You must have done something wrong. And so there's this back and forth dialogue for about 20 chapters. Actually, to be more precise, about 17 chapters. 27 chapters. This back and forth dialogue happens between him and the 3 kings that come and visit him. And they present all these different analysis of his life, different things that he may have done wrong. And they're trying to explore, what have you done wrong? Right? What have you done wrong? And at every stage, Job defends himself and says, I am innocent. I did not do any of this. And of course, we here have his gospel and we say, even God declares his righteousness. He declares his righteousness before the devil. He says he's one that loves righteousness, shuns evil, right? These friends come and do exactly the opposite. They come and accuse him of unrighteousness. And so this all culminates and leads to an ultimatum in chapter 31, where the words of Job are concluded. And he says, oh, that I had one to hear me. Here is my mark, that the Almighty would answer me, that my prosecutor had written a book. Right? He's saying prosecutors have written a book against me. I demand that the Almighty would answer me. We're reaching a point now where Job wants an answer from God. He demands an answer of God. And I wouldn't blame him. At least a reason as to why all of this has happened. I mean, this man has lost absolutely everything. He's lost his sons and daughters. That's irreplaceable. He's lost his home. He's lost his health. He's lost his mental health. He's lost his relationships. He's lost his friends. He has lost everything. He has lost everything, right? He finished it. The words of Job are concluded with this. And then chapter 38, something astonishing happens. This is a story that's so powerful to me, really and truly. Chapter 38. Then the Lord answered Job out of a whirlwind and said, "Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched out the line upon it, to where its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" Which is basically divine sarcasm to say, who are you to question me? Who are you to ask and bring accusations to me, right? You've asked and you've brought in allegations to me. Well, I'm going to ask you some questions. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth, right? Tell me if you have understanding, he says. And again, divine sarcasm to say, you cannot bring questions before me. You cannot bring accusations before me. Kind of harsh for everything that Job's been through. For him to have a mere answer to the question, it seems very, very harsh that God would respond in such a way. Let's go to Job 40. Basically Job goes through this tour around the universe, right? And he gets shown all this stuff and he gets questioned about all this stuff. And then in Job chapter 40, moreover, the Lord answered Job and said, "Shall the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? He who rebukes God, let him answer it." Listen to what Job says. Then Job answered the Lord and said, "Behold, I am vile. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand over my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer. Yes, twice, but I will proceed no further." Then the Lord answered Job out of a whirlwind again and said, "Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Would you indeed annul my judgment?" He asks him, if you could actually take my judgment back, would you annul my judgment? If I made a judgment, would you take it back? Would you condemn me that you may be justified? Have you an arm like God? Or can you thunder with a voice like his? Then adorn yourself with majesty and splendor, and array yourself with glory and beauty. Disperse the rage of your wrath. Look on everyone who is proud and humble him. These are things that are not that man simply is not capable of, neither Job nor anyone. And again, this is divine sarcasm to say, look, even if you had it in your hand, would you take what God has judged to be fit and right, no matter how painful it is? Would you take it back? Would you annul it? Would you annul it and condemn it or condemn me as God, that you may be justified? Concluding part, Job chapter 32. 42, sorry. Then Job answered the Lord and said, "I know that you can do everything, and that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You asked, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand." We are looking back and we're saying, this is harsh on Job. Why make him go through this? And yet look at what he says. He says, you asked, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand. Things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. What is it that's wonderful? Well, he got a tour around the universe. And the result of this tour out of a whirlwind, where God takes him around the universe and questions him, he says, things too, I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Listen, please, and let me speak. Listen to this. You said, I will question you, and you shall answer me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes sees you. Therefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. The most afflicted man in the history of the world, who suffered every single possible affliction possible, who suffered every single pain possible. In verse 5 says, I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. I'll tell you what this says for me. First of all, it says to me that no one can really question God. Right? No one can question God. And that comes from 2 points. That comes from the fact that we're mere mortals and he is God. We cannot question God. Right? That's by virtue of the fact that God is God. He's not running for God. He's not running for your election. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what you think you know. You are in desperate need of God and the gospel, whether you realize it or not. That is just simply not up for debate. That is truth. That's the first point. And by virtue of that, you cannot question God. Because you couldn't annul his judgments even if you're offered the opportunity to. Because there are things too wonderful for you to understand, like Job says. And no purpose of God can be withheld. But also there's this. It's that we look and we quantify pain by everything that is on earth. I'm telling you that the real pain that one suffers is separation from God. It's hell in eternity. As God and Jesus himself preached, that should be the real measurement of pain. It should not be anything that we can measure and see on this earth. And here's the other extremely astonishing thing. What was the benefit of all of this? Well, it's clear. It's right there. He says before, I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore, I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. If you were to ask Job, if you were to take all this back, if you were to get your sons and your daughters back, if you were to get everything back and you could redo everything, what would you do? He'd say, no, I'd go through it all over again. Because before I knew of God by the hearing, but now I see God. Is that transaction worth it? Is the loss of absolutely everything worth getting to know God that little bit more? Job would say yes. The most afflicted man outside of Christ in the history of the world. Job's answer is straight. He says yes. He says, I repent in dust and ashes. For what, by the way? What did he do? Because in all of this, he did not sin. You know when he sinned? It's when he questioned God. It's when he brought an accusation before God in Job chapter 31. Job chapter 31 verse 35. Which is he brought an accusation before God saying, I demand an answer. You answer me right now. Why did I go through this? Why did I lose everything? Why are all these people accusing me? Why is everyone accusing me? And here's his answer. So what's our answer? What's our justification for pain as Christians? Well, number one, we know that it's all a means to an end. A means to what end? A means to an end where we are united with Christ even after death. What is the worst that life can throw at us? Well, it's pain. Well, it's loss. Well, it's death. By the way, death isn't even the worst because even Job's wife tells him to curse God and die. We look forward to the resurrection. We look forward to the resurrection of the dead and the life of the age to come. We say it on every single prayer. We look forward to it. We don't mourn it. We do not mourn it. We're Christians. That's proper Christian soteriology, right? This is something we look forward to. And then secondly, in all the pain, Christ reveals himself to us. He doesn't just reveal himself. He's sanctified it, like I said before. He's sanctified every single pain there is, whether it's loneliness, whether it's a breakup, whether it's disease, health, bad grades, bad friends, abandoned by your friends, whatever it is that you may be going through, he's sanctified it because he's been through it. He has been through it, right? And not just that, he was crushed by it. And not just that, he raised from the dead from it. That's significant. That's a story of incredible victory. This story of Job is an incredible victory. Right? It doesn't just end there. God commands the three friends of Job to go to Job to plead for him to make a sacrifice for them so that they are absolved, so that they are forgiven for the sin that they did against Job. And Job is blessed, right? And the Lord restored, this is Job 42 verse 10. And the Lord restored Job's losses when he prayed for his friends. Indeed, the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then all his brothers, all his sisters, and all those who had been his acquaintances before came to him and ate food with him in his house. And they consoled him and comforted him for all the adversity that the Lord had brought upon him. Each one gave him a piece of silver and each a ring of gold. Now the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning, for he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys. Suffice it to say that were it not for these blessings, Job would have done what he has done anyway. But this is wisdom literature. What's it trying to teach here? It's trying to teach that the Christian soteriological view of pain is that it is a mere means to an end. It is a mere means where God reveals himself in your life. And it also a mere means to an end where we are united with God. As Sammy said earlier, in the world you will have tribulation. And this is a condition of life. If you live, you suffer. If you live, there is pain. Whoever you are, wherever you are, prince, king, peasant, shepherd, whoever you are, you're going to suffer. The atheistic worldview provides you with an answer of deliver yourself as quickly as possible. The Christian one offers you one of victory and hope. A real meaningful hope, not a meaningless hope. Not an end where you're just buried 6 feet under and that's that. It's an end where you're united with God. And that is worth everything. The mere getting to know God from hearing him to seeing him is proven all the worth it from the most afflicted man in the history of the world. I've spoken a lot, but this is quite a topic that I get really, really emotional about. We'll hear closing thoughts from everyone. 1 hour and 37 minutes. Your thoughts?
Just a very, very short thing. Well, I know you'll love this especially, and every time I'm reminded about this, I think Bass knows what I'm going to say. I get goosebumps because in the Coptic language, in the hymn of the intercessions, for the benefit of the people who aren't familiar with the Coptic church, when we say the words Piathlovoros, there's 2 translations of that expression. And we say it in relation to martyrs in our church, so people that have suffered for the sake of Christ, people who have gone through unspeakable suffering and pain and have died for the sake of the faith. And those 2 translations are, 1, struggle mantled, so somebody who has suffered, someone who's experienced pain. But the other translation is victorious. They both have the same word.
Isn't that incredible that those 2 words are synonymous? Thoughts, Sammy, Bassem?
You go first.
I'm so challenged by the story of Job. You know.
Me too. Me too.
And the only way I know how to make sense of it right now is just that it's an example of long suffering and how faith and love grew from that long suffering and how he was blessed after going through all those tribulations. But he wouldn't have done it any differently. He didn't annul the these circumstances at all. He would do it all over again, which is nuts to me.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible.
That's it.
If you have anything.
No, I got nothing.
I'll just finish with another quote from C.S. Lewis and then 2 verses that are tied to it. It's just, all these discussions are beautiful and I hope that people who watch us really benefit from it. I personally got really
Me too.
challenged and excited and touched by Job's story.
It's incredible. Don't thank me. Thank
but whoever is going through something, you may think that, well, we're quite young, excited, we don't know what we're talking about, whatever you're going through. So I'm quoting now C.S. Lewis, and then I will read the 2 verses, and I won't say anything. You can. C.S. Lewis says, when pain is to be borne, a little courage helps more than much knowledge. A little human sympathy more than much courage, and the least tincture of the love of God more than all. In Romans 8:32, St. Paul says, he who didn't spare his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? The author of the Hebrews says, for we do not have a high priest, speaking of Jesus, who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. I hope that this gives hope to whoever going through something that is unbearable.
Any concluding thoughts from anyone else?
I think we spend a long time defining pain and suffering, you know, and considering it from a Christian perspective. I think like it'd be so good to have a part 2 to this, where
I think there will be. And I think it would be an amazing one if we could go through maybe a personal circumstance and walk through what we went through and what our experiences were. But absolutely, I think that's in the future works. Any other concluding thoughts? We thank you for being with us for a longer episode than usual. I've thoroughly enjoyed this episode. God bless everyone who's worked through it. We've got a whole team here behind us. I want to sincerely thank the entire team, or the In Truth podcast team, and my God, has it become an army. I want to personally thank David Malik, Joseph Cadiz, Samuel Abdel Malik, George Gergis, the panel here, for what I think has been an absolutely incredible episode. Thank you all. We'll see you all in the next one. God bless.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Cheers.
guys.
Thank you.